To die to sin is one thing, but there are many deaths in the Christian faith. Somebody shout hallelujah. So when Paul speaks of dyings, it's not just about sin. There are people who have understood the sin principle and they're living right. But there are other parts of them that are not dead. Somebody shout hallelujah. So he says, are they all ministers of Christ? He asks. I speak as a fool. He says, I am more in labors, more abundant, in stripes above measure, in prisons, more frequent, in deaths often. It's not just a beating for him to die physically. He's giving us a deeper definition of death. In deaths often. It's one thing to beat your flesh to subjection. It's a submission of your flesh that it won't yield to the deception of the world, but to the way of the Spirit. That's one thing. And you can win that. But how does your conscience live after a certain death? Because you see, that's the place that hears either God or Satan. When Paul says, herein do I exercise myself to walk void of offense toward God and man. That's the exercising of a man's conscience. It's a place in him. He says, herein do I exercise myself to have always a conscience. He says, void of offense toward God and man. A conscience void of offense toward God and man. There's a difference between the working of the flesh and the working of the conscience. Because once it is defiled, you can hear a wrong voice and call it God. Once it is defiled, you can seek to hear God and never hear him. One of the reasons many Christians in the world are struggling is they claim to hear God that has actually not spoken. Because that's not God. And they don't even know that that's not God. And some of them, you want to tell them that you need to die first to really hear God. You need to die first to really hear God. But what do they know about dying? What do they know about submitting yourself to God fully? What does it mean to, what do they understand by yielding yourself 100% to God? Because I know men who have tamed the sinful nature, but they're not yielded to God. They're not yielded to God. They're not dead. And so they're not really alive. They're not alive in the spirit. It's beyond quoting scriptures. It's beyond praying for 2, 4, 5 hours. I've seen people who have prayed for, I met people who could pray the whole night, but they were dead men. Because they had a wrong revelation about the God that they were even speaking to.